You think you can just walk all over us? Well, you're wrong.
The room froze before the words even finished leaving her lips. The glass towers beyond the window caught the morning sun like cold fire. Light slid across the polished mahogany table, a dark river running through the center of the boardroom. Leather chairs stood like quiet witnesses around it. On the far wall, a ticking clock cut the silence into even pieces. In that stillness, her voice lingered, thin and sharp, as if it could slice through a person's place in the world. She was a senior executive, known for smooth speeches and sharper judgments. Today, she didn't wait for the slide to finish or the sentence to land. She cut in. She waved a manicured hand toward the black man at the end of the table and said, with a small, dismissive laugh, "We'll need someone with authority to explain the numbers." The projector hummed. Lines of revenue glowed on the screen like city lights at night. He stood steady at the head of the table, posture calm, eyes clear. He did not flinch. He did not rush. He simply held the clicker and the room's quiet weight. His tie was simple. His notebook was neat. His expression revealed nothing. No one corrected her. Not yet. Around the table, faces dipped, pens stopped moving, and shoulders tightened under expensive suits. A senior partner coughed and looked down. A legal counsel sipped water for no reason at all. An assistant froze mid-typing, her fingers hanging above the keys. The air grew heavy, as if the room itself was deciding what it allowed and what it would no longer allow. The mahogany table became a stage of hidden power. Every polished inch reflected careers, titles, and the quiet fear of being on the wrong side of a moment. It had held 100 deals and 1,000 signatures. Today it held a test that none of them had planned to take. He clicked to the next slide. The chart rose like a measured tide. He spoke in a voice that was steady and exact. "Here is the year-over-year performance," he said. "You'll see the inflection at Q3, she interrupted again. "Yes, but we really should have the right person take it from here," she said, not looking at him, addressing the table instead. "Someone who signs off, someone responsible." A quiet scrape of a chair leg sounded like thunder. A young analyst opened his mouth and then closed it. Two board members exchanged a glance but said nothing. Their silence was not neutral. It felt like a choice. Outside, the city moved. Horns, sirens, wind between towers. But the boardroom sealed it all out. Inside, the only sounds were the soft buzz of the projector and the clock counting seconds that suddenly felt long. He set the clicker on the table. His palm rested beside it, flat and calm, and at the far end she leaned back, a confident smirk playing at her lips, convinced she still held the room's power. The silence after her interruption did not disturb him. He had faced silence before. Silence in classrooms when his answers were ignored. Silence in interviews where his resume was set aside. Silence in rooms where decisions were made but he was not invited to speak. Silence to him was never empty. It was a space to hold steady. He stood now at the end of the polished mahogany table, posture calm, hands resting near a neatly folded notepad. The notepad looked ordinary, but it was always the same. Clean pages, tight handwriting, a structure only he could see. To him it was not paper. It was vision made visible. Her arrogance hung in the air, sharp and restless. She tapped her designer pen against the table, as if impatience gave her more authority than facts. She leaned forward, shoulders squared, as though pressing him down with posture alone. Yet the man she dismissed did not shrink. His calmness stood in direct contrast, a mirror that reflected back the hollowness of her command. The others in the room noticed. A partner's hand paused on his tie knot. Another tapped a finger lightly on the table's edge, eyes lowered but not blind. They knew who he was. They knew what she did not. But no one interrupted her. Their silence was not loyalty. It was caution. As she spoke over him again, the narrative of his life rose quietly within him, unshaken by her noise. He remembered the early mornings, the buses that carried him across town, the jobs he worked while studying late into the night. He remembered rejection letters, dozens, then hundreds, stacked in drawers like reminders of doors that had stayed closed. And he remembered the one acceptance letter that broke through, a scholarship earned not by favor, but by persistence. From there, he climbed, not by shortcuts, but by endurance. Internships where he worked twice the hours, projects others called impossible. Teams he built, not with the loudest voices, but with the most committed hearts. He learned that leadership was not about being heard the fastest. It was about carrying vision the farthest. Now he was here, not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as the one who had shaped the very empire she believed she owned with her tone. His notepad lay folded at the table's edge, its symmetry a quiet symbol of who he was, precise, ordered, unwilling to be broken by arrogance. She spoke again, her voice lined with certainty. We need someone who can actually decide. For a moment, the projector light flickered against his face, shadow and brightness splitting across his calm expression. He did not answer her words. He did not need to. His silence was not weakness, it was weight. He lifted his eyes and looked across the table. His gaze moved past the charts, past the flickering slides, past her performance. It landed squarely on her, quiet, piercing, steady, an unspoken challenge, the kind that required no voice yet demanded an answer. Her smirk was not born in the boardroom. It had been trained, polished, and practiced over years, an expression she used to mask doubt and project control. To her it was not a smile, it was a weapon. She had built her career on appearances. From the early days she understood that perception often outweighed performance. A confident tone carried further than careful research. A well-tailored suit often replaced a well-thought plan. She discovered quickly that in certain circles, the right connections opened doors faster than the right ideas, and she walked through those doors, heels clicking like declarations of ownership. Her rise was steady but shallow. She surrounded herself with people who praised her presence, not her process. Promotions came, not because of the risk she took, but because she never risked exposing her own limits. She learned to navigate dinners, galas, and conferences where charm held more value than content. Every handshake was a performance. Every compliment was a calculated trade. From the outside, her life glittered. A high-rise apartment with glass walls overlooking the city. Cars polished to reflect status more than speed. Invitations to circles where wealth mingled with influence. Yet inside, her victories were fragile, built on surface rather than substance. The glamour was real, but it rested on insecurity she never admitted aloud. And now, sitting at the long mahogany table, she felt that old insecurity flicker like a shadow. The man she dismissed stood calm, his silence heavy, his gaze steady. Something in her tightened, but instead of yielding, she doubled down. She tapped her pen against the polished wood. The designer brand gleamed in the light, gold letters etched into its frame. To her, the pen was more than a tool. It was proof of belonging, proof of success, proof that she had earned a seat at the table. Yet the symbol was hollow. Authority could not be written into existence by a luxury pen. Still, she clung to it. "Let's move this forward," she said firmly, her voice slicing into the air. She didn't look at him as she spoke, directing her words toward the others, as though he were invisible. "We need leadership here. We can't waste time waiting for outside consultants to guess at what they don't understand." The phrase was sharp, delivered with confidence, but it revealed more than she intended. By calling him an outsider, she revealed the assumption that drove her judgment. That power looked a certain way, spoke a certain way, and came wrapped in the comfort of familiarity. He did not fit the shape she had decided power must take. The room stiffened. Some lowered their eyes further. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They knew what she did not. They understood what she had overlooked. But her arrogance pressed on, louder with each word, trying to cover the tremor of fear rising beneath her practiced voice. Her pen tapped again, steady, rhythmic, like a gavel striking down judgment. But it was only metal and ink. It carried no real weight. Finally, she leaned back in her chair, her smirk sharpening into a line meant to wound. She turned toward him at last and delivered the sentence she believed would settle the matter. "Let's be honest. Someone like you doesn't set the direction of an empire." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, setting the storm into motion. The silence cracked not with anger, but with calm. He had waited long enough. Every second of stillness had pressed deeper into the room, every heartbeat pulling the weight of truth closer to the surface. Now he lifted his head, his voice measured, controlled, and impossible to dismiss. "My name," he began, "is not consultant. It is not guest. And it is not outsider. The words landed softly, but their weight filled the air like thunder beneath glass. The tapping of her pen stopped. The room leaned toward him, not in movement, but in breath. Executives who had remained still suddenly shifted in their chairs, caught between loyalty and shame. He reached to the edge of the table, where his notepad lay folded in its usual order. Beside it, almost hidden, rested a small plastic card attached to a simple lanyard. For 2 meetings it had gone unnoticed, mistaken as any ordinary ID. But now, as he slid it forward, the emblem of the company glinted in the light. The letters beneath his name carried the title no one in that room could outrank: Chief Executive Officer. The badge was plain, almost ordinary. Yet in that moment, it carried more power than the polished marble walls or the golden skyline beyond the windows. It was not design that gave it weight, but truth. The woman's smirk faltered, though she fought to hold it. Her eyes darted from the badge to the man she had dismissed, as though the simple piece of plastic had rewritten the entire script she thought she controlled. He did not raise his voice. He did not lean forward. He did not point a finger. Instead, his calmness exposed the storm behind her confidence. For years, he continued, his gaze steady. I have led this company through challenges you read about in reports but never carried on your back. I have signed the contracts that kept these doors open, built the teams that gave these numbers meaning, and stood in places where silence was supposed to keep me small. But silence never broke me. It shaped me. Each sentence peeled away her assumptions. The room, once wrapped in her arrogance, now tilted toward him. Executives who had looked away now nodded slightly, acknowledging the authority they had always known, but never dared to announce. Her pen rolled from her fingers and clattered softly onto the mahogany table. The sound was small, but in the stillness it echoed like a verdict, a symbol of authority reduced to noise. He did not glance at it. He looked only at her. You speak of leadership as if it is something you perform, he said, his tone unshaken. But leadership is not performed. It is carried. It is proven in silence, in struggle, in the moments no one applauds. Leadership is not a smirk. It is sacrifice. And sacrifice built this empire. The room thickened with the truth of it. No one else dared speak. A partner's hand tightened on his pen, but he didn't write. A secretary closed her laptop, realizing notes were no longer needed. The boardroom had turned into a court, and the verdict was being read. The woman's face stiffened, but the confidence in her eyes was fractured now, split by the quiet force she could not dismiss. He leaned back slightly, his badge still glinting against the dark wood. His gaze swept across the room. Pausing on her last, "You forgot to ask," he said softly, each word deliberate. "Whose empire this is?" The silence after his words was not empty. It was heavy like stone pressed against glass. No one dared to break it. Every eye turned toward him, waiting. The woman's smirk had vanished, replaced by the stillness of someone who suddenly realizes they had spoken in the wrong court. He did not rush. His calm voice filled the room, measured and clear. "This company was not handed to me," he said. "It was built brick by brick, decision by decision, sacrifice by sacrifice. I was told no more times than I can count. I heard every reason I should stop, and still I kept building." The words cut deeper than volume ever could. His gaze moved slowly around the table, resting on each face. The men and women who sat in silence now listened as though hearing the foundation of the very building beneath them. He spoke of nights when he studied under dim lamps, working 2 jobs while finishing his degree. He told of letters that came back stamped with rejection, each one a door closed, each one a reason to fight harder. He recalled the lean years when he had poured everything he had into one small office, believing it could grow into something larger. And when the doors opened, he continued, "I hired not the loudest voices, but the most committed hearts. I trusted talent others overlooked. I built teams that believed vision mattered more than privilege. Together we shaped this company into what it is today." The projector's glow flickered, casting pale light against the wall. Above the long table hung a framed photograph. For years it had gone unnoticed, a piece of decor more than history. But now the eyes in the room found it. The photograph showed him, years younger, cutting the ribbon at headquarters, surrounded by workers who had stood with him since the beginning. The picture was not decoration, it was proof. The contrast was stark. She had relied on image, status, and surface. He had built with sweat, silence, and sacrifice. Her designer pen had marked papers. His persistence had marked history. The woman shifted in her chair. Her pen lay forgotten on the table. For once, she had no interruption. He leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now, but carrying more force than before. I never wanted an empire for myself. I wanted to prove it could be done, that with vision and with work, no barrier could hold us down. This company is not just numbers. It is people. It is trust. It is truth. No one moved. The silence was no longer avoidance, it was respect. The weight of his leadership filled the room, pressing down every doubt, overshadowing every careless interruption. Finally, a board member cleared his throat, not to challenge but to affirm. Mr. Chairman, he said quietly, we see it now. We see you, heads nodded, eyes lowered in acknowledgement. Even those who had stayed silent too long now let their posture shift in respect. And in that still moment, without raising his voice, the room itself gave him what had always been his, recognition of his rightful place. The first sign was small. Her voice wavered. It came in the middle of a sentence, as she tried to steady herself, to reclaim the authority she believed was hers by right. But the words that once flowed sharp and clean now stumbled over each other. Thinner, weaker, unconvincing even to her own ears. She straightened in her chair, adjusting her blazer as though posture could repair the damage. She reached for her notes, flipping a page with a snap meant to sound deliberate. Yet the room saw through it. The silence of her colleagues was no longer the silence of caution. It was the silence of judgment. For the first time, she felt it, the weight of eyes not on him, but on her. She tried again. What I meant earlier, she said, pausing too long between words, was that clarity is important. The line was clumsy, unfit for the polished executive image she had spent years curating. The smirk that once shielded her now betrayed her, twitching at the corners as if even her face no longer trusted the performance. Across the table, his calm presence deepened the contrast. He did not need to speak again. His silence stood taller than her words. Where her authority fractured, his authority only grew. Her hands reached for the coffee cup beside her, fingers curling around porcelain that had cooled long ago. She lifted it quickly, too quickly. The liquid trembled, rippling against the rim, and then they saw it. A thin crack running down the cup's side, a flaw invisible until this moment. The symbol was undeniable. The object that once offered her composure now mirrored her collapse. She noticed it too. Her hand froze. The trembling in the cup was no longer from the liquid. It was from her. Her mind raced back to the moment she had dismissed him. She replayed the confidence, the arrogance, the certainty that he did not belong. But now the memory burned, because her mistake was not professional. It was moral. She had not challenged numbers. She had dismissed a person, and that wound could not be covered with reports or titles. The air grew thick, pressing down harder with every second. The executives around her sat straighter, no longer aligned with her posture of command. Their silence marked her isolation. She forced one last attempt. I only wanted to ensure we had the right direction, she muttered. But even she heard the weakness in her tone. It was not direction she had sought, it was dismissal. And everyone in the room knew it. Her arrogance had been armor, but armor built of glass. Now it cracked piece by piece, revealing the fear beneath. Fear not of losing her job, but of being exposed. Of being remembered not for her titles, but for her arrogance. The coffee cup rattled softly as she set it back down, the porcelain tapping against the saucer like a faint echo of her own unraveling. Her lips parted as if to speak again, but no words came. The smirk was gone. The pen lay useless. The armor was broken. And for the first time in the meeting, perhaps for the first time in her career, she chose silence. The silence broke, not with him, but with them. A senior partner cleared his throat, the sound louder than words in the tense air. I think, he said carefully, we should acknowledge that the strategy he outlined is not only correct, but the very reason we're still competitive. His voice was steady, though his eyes flicked toward the CEO with a trace of guilt for staying silent too long. Others followed. One by one, voices that had once hidden behind lowered eyes began to rise. An operations head leaned forward. His decisions carried us through 2 downturns. We all remember that. A finance director added, without his risk, there would be no empire to argue about today. Their words fell into the room like stones dropped into still water, each ripple growing wider. What began as cautious statements turned into declarations of loyalty. Executives who had once avoided the conflict now spoke clearly, choosing dignity over complicity. The woman shifted in her chair. Her eyes darted left and right, watching the alliances she assumed were hers bend away from her. For years she had believed her charm and posture were enough to hold the room. Now charm cracked like thin ice and posture offered no ground. The CEO sat calm, his notepad still folded, his badge still visible. He did not need to demand support. The truth of his leadership had already done the work. The reversal was complete. Once isolated at the end of the table, he now commanded the room without lifting his voice. The lights overhead hummed softly. A technician had adjusted the dimmer earlier that morning, but now the brightness seemed almost symbolic. The boardroom, once shadowed by arrogance and silence, glowed with a sharp clarity. What had been hidden was now visible. The light did not flatter. It revealed. One of the younger analysts, silent until now, spoke up. His words trembled but carried weight. I joined because of him. His story is the reason I believed I had a place here. The admission drew nods, not pity. Even the older executives, hardened by years of power, found themselves remembering the day they had first been inspired by the same man they nearly allowed to be dismissed. The woman's hand moved toward her pen but stopped halfway. She realized the symbol no longer worked. The pen carried no weight against truth spoken out loud. She set it down, the faint clink against the table sounding like surrender. Around her, the boardroom that once reflected her authority now shifted fully toward him. It was not rebellion. It was recognition. Recognition of who had truly built what they now defended. The CEO did not gloat. He did not lean forward in triumph. He remained calm, allowing the voices of others to fill the space, knowing that true authority does not announce itself. It earns itself. By the time the last executive spoke, the choice was clear. Allegiance had shifted. Respect had aligned. The empire stood with its rightful leader. And in the center of it all, the woman finally understood what isolation felt like. She looked around the glowing boardroom and saw no allies. The smirk was gone, the armor broken. For the first time, she stood alone. The room was no longer hers. What had begun with a smirk and a dismissive hand now stood as a courtroom of truth, where silence had testified and voices had chosen sides. All eyes rested on him, not in hesitation, not in doubt, but in acknowledgement. The tension that once isolated him had turned into a circle of respect. He rose to his feet slowly, not with force, but with purpose. His hand rested lightly on the polished mahogany table, the same table that had once seemed to tilt in her favor. Now it reflected only the calm strength of the man who had built the empire they all stood upon. He looked at them, each face, each posture, each silence that had carried weight. His voice, when it came, was steady and deliberate. I don't just run this meeting, he said, pausing long enough for every word to sink in. I run this empire. The declaration did not come like thunder. Came like judgment, calm, final, undeniable. The sentence fell into the air with the force of history behind it, as though every late night, every rejection, every sacrifice had gathered in those few words. The weight of his truth dismantled what arrogance had tried to build. No one clapped. No one cheered. Respect of that kind does not need noise. Instead, the silence returned, this time not heavy with fear, but filled with dignity. His words echoed across the table like the strike of a gavel, closing the case without anger, without spectacle. The woman who had dismissed him sat motionless, her coffee cup forgotten, the thin crack down its porcelain side visible in the bright boardroom light. That flaw was no longer just an accident of design. It was a mirror of what pride without substance becomes. Around the table, the executives knew they had witnessed more than a correction of titles. They had seen something larger. Arrogance exposed, truth affirmed, dignity restored. What unfolded was not simply the settling of a boardroom dispute, but a reminder of what power is and what it is not. Power is not posture. It is not a smirk or a pen that signals status. True power is sacrifice remembered, vision carried, truth spoken when silence would have been easier. As the CEO gathered his notepad and set the ID badge back against his chest, the lesson lingered in the air. His authority did not rest in plastic or paper. It rested in the undeniable story that had carried him to that seat, and the justice of truth that no dismissal could erase. The woman lowered her eyes at last. She understood now that her mistake had not been misjudging his role, but misjudging the nature of power itself. The meeting ended not with applause, but with reflection. Chairs shifted, papers gathered, footsteps echoed out the glass doors. Yet what stayed behind was more than memory. It was a truth that could not be silenced again. True power does not shout. It does not dismiss. It stands calm, unbroken, and undeniable. And that was the statement heard far beyond the boardroom.